Again, welcome to the classroom. Today we will continue exploring photographic exposure. In our last lesson, we were talking about the importance of mastering exposure, the same way it's very important to master composition. And working with exposure is working with light, creating different light designs, and controlling light so we can end up having the images that we want. Controlling light allows us to create different light designs to transmit the feeling, the emotions, or the idea that we want to in our movie. And I gave you two examples in our last lesson where you saw that depending on the type of story that you want to tell and the type of feelings or ideas that you want to transmit, you have to manipulate light in such a way that it will help you tell the story that you want to tell. So I cannot underestimate or undermine the importance of light. And that's something you're going to hear me hammering and hammering all the time because it is part of cinematic language, controlling light. We said that depending on the type of environment that you have, you'll be able to have a suitable light design because not every environment is the same. It's not the same thing to shoot during the morning than to shoot in the afternoon. It's not the same thing to shoot where there is a lot of sunshine or to shoot in a day that is cloudy or shooting in a shade. It's not the same thing to shoot in the afternoon or to shoot in the evening. So, depending on the conditions that you have when you're shooting, you will have to work with your exposure. You will have to work with that light design to maximize exposure, to maximize the amount of detail that you need to that they need to show. In this case, we have bad exposure because this image, as we stated, was underexposed. It was underexposed to light. It was receiving very little light. The camera itself, the sensor, which is what record the image, was receiving less light than it was supposed to under those conditions. And those conditions are sunset. Even in sunset, this image could have looked better than it's looking here. But apparently the photographer did not do his or her job. At the end of the day, you're responsible for the results. And this picture has very little detail because it's too dark. An opposite and equal problem is when we have too much light or when we are overexposed. We have more light than we actually need. You're seeing that we have a similar problem here. And the problem is a lack of detail. There could have been more detail here if the photographer could have made the proper adjustments in the camera so it would not be as overexposed and washed out as it looks. I also shared with you an image or a picture, here you have it, where we were showing you a correctly exposed image, one that is overexposed and one that is underexposed. And remember, whether it's underexposed or overexposed, the problem is the same, a lack of detail. We said that to master exposure, you have to master three elements that we will be discussing in today's lesson. Those elements are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. In our last lesson, we also defined exposure as to the amount of light allowed to enter the sensor. You can also say the amount of light that reaches the film, but none of you are going to be recording in film. I think I can make that prediction very accurately because we live in a digital world and the only people that use film are professionals or people that enjoy that, right? But other than that, the film world is very much digital nowadays. So that's why I'm using the word sensor. The sensor is what records the image in your camera. Whether you have a DSLR, whether you have a full frame camera, whether you have a cell phone. And I said that there are three things that we have to master, three elements. The first one is aperture. And I think that in the last lesson, I remember I was referring to the aperture had that adjustable opening at the end of the lens. And the part where the lens connects to the body of the camera. And I was using the analogy of the iris in your eye. You have a device in your eye that is called the iris. And the iris does very much what you see the aperture doing here. It either opens a lot to allow light to enter, or it closes to limit the amount of light that is entering. So that is something that you have to adjust before you take an image. And there's a measurement that we use to measure aperture. And you might want to jot this down. Okay, there's a lot of terminology that we have to learn here. The term that you're going to learn today, that is the measure of how much light is being stopped from entering the aperture, is f-stop. And you're seeing it right here in the presentation, f-stop. That's the amount of light that we allow, or do not allow rather, to enter the sensor. We said that when you're in a very dark place, your iris opens very wide to allow as much light to enter as possible. Well, you do the same thing with a camera. When you're shooting in low light conditions, you have to open the aperture as much as possible without, of course, overexposing your image. And you do the opposite when you have too much light. If you're out there shooting an image right there in a sunny day, then you need to close the aperture of your camera the same way that the iris in your eyes closes to allow less light to enter. Because if not, then you guys remember when you guys told me that when you were in the dark and you turn on the switch of the light, it hurt. Well, if the aperture in your camera is more open than it's supposed to be, you're going to hurt the image. Okay? So I think it will be correct for you to think in terms of the iris of your eye when you're thinking about aperture. Let's talk about f-stop for a moment. And guys, you're awfully quiet. You're there, right? You're listening. Okay, guys. Okay, hey, guys, please, if you have any question, remember that this is the right forum, right? Because some of you sometimes send emails and you tell me things like, "Mister, I did not understand the class." Wow, no teacher can answer or address a problem like that. You did not understand the class, so what? You want the class to be like repeated all over again? So when you have a question, you have to be more specific. I did not understand this particular thing. Could you re-explain this other concept because I did not understand or catch it well? That's the type of question that a student should ask, and this is the appropriate place and forum for you to do so. So don't be shy. I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions, but your questions have to be specific, okay? Not just I don't understand, because that's actually, that tells me nothing, and it's frustrating for a teacher. So guys, any question about what we discussed so far? Okay, so you guys are so smart. Okay, let's look at how f-stop works. F-stop. The letter F refers to photon. A photon is a Greek word that means light. Light particles in physics are called photons. So when we talk about f-stop, we're talking about a measure of stopping light. The same way that your iris stops light when you're out there on a sunny day. Well, the camera does the same. You're supposed to adjust your aperture, and the measure that you use is the f-stop. F-stops go from 1 to 22. And the bigger the number, the more light you're stopping. You can look at this diagram here. Do you see the one that's very open? What's the f-stop there? If you can read that. Anyone? What? It says it right there. F what? 2.8. 2.8. So that's a very low aperture. That means that the aperture is very wide, that a lot of light is being allowed to enter. Okay? Now look at the last one. What does it say there? What's the f-stop? 11. So that means that from 2.8 to 11, I'm stopping more light. You see that it's more closed. And I told you it goes all the way to f22. And look at how close it looks there at 11. So you can imagine how it looks at 22. Let me ask you a question. If the higher the number, the more light you're stopping, where would you require higher f-stops? If you're shooting at nighttime or if you're shooting in the sunshine? Why? Why? And you're doing that why? Why are you stopping the light? So thank you. You have to use the vocabulary of the class, guys. It's not that it looks better. It's to keep it from getting overexposed. Very well. Whoever said it, very well. Okay, use the language that we're learning. So to keep it from getting overexposed, we use a higher f-stop. We stop more light. Now, if you were shooting at nighttime, would you shoot at 2.8 or would you shoot at 8? Why? Exactly. Exactly. To allow more light in because when it's nighttime, you need more light to go into the sensor. When it's daytime, you need less light to go into the sensor. It's the same thing with your eyes. I mean, when it's too bright, what do? You squint your eyes, right? Your iris gets smaller and you squint your eyes. Why are you doing that? Don't say because it hurts. That's not the correct answer. So that what you're seeing will be using photographic terms correctly exposed. So you can capture all the detail. You squint and you can see better. It's the same thing with the camera. Yeah. What? Queda en medio. What are you talking about? Oh, sir, you can. It's that's a that you can adjust it any way you want. Those are just examples. But I told you that it goes from 1 to 22. So between 1 and 22, you have all that ranges of aperture. Did you get that? Did you understand, sir? So you can take a lens and you can adjust it to any of those apertures that you want to. Well, let me explain something. Not all lenses are the same. Some lenses, the cheaper ones will probably give you an f-stop from 22 to 5 or 4.5. That's the lowest it can get. That's a cheap lens. You want what we call a faster lens, a lens that gives you a lower f-stop, so it gives you more range. It's going to be more expensive. Did you get that? Not all lenses are the same. Some are cheaper, some are very expensive. Let me tell you something that you probably don't know. Some lenses are more expensive than cameras. Now, why do we need to know that? Because we want nice images. And another concept that you need to understand is the concept of bokeh. Bokeh. What is that? It's a Japanese word. What does it mean? Oh, remember, I don't talk Japanese. I just know what it means, but not because I know Japanese. But the word bokeh is a Japanese word that refers to the portion of an image that is defocused or blurry. So bokeh is the Japanese word for blur, and it is used in photography. It is part of the language that you will be using in this class. When I say bokeh, you immediately need to know what bokeh is. And let me show you bokeh. Look at that picture here. Look at the image. This is from a movie called The Tree of Life. And there we have two actors there, two characters in the movie. There's a father is saying goodbye to his son. He's embracing him because he's going out on a business trip. Notice something about the image. Look at that picture. What do you notice about it? And the rest, exactly. You will notice that the part of this image is focused, And it's focused obviously on the two actors, as Mr. Santiago said, because when you focus on something, you're calling attention to it because it's important. So in that image, the most important thing is not the tree behind them. It's not the cars that are parked behind them. It's them. The story's being told in the characters and the actions of the characters. But you'll notice that whatever is not them, everything else is what? It's blurry. Now, well, we're going to be talking about that in a second. Well, we're going to be talking about depth of field in a moment. This is considered visually pleasant. This is considered beautiful. Why? Because it is natural. This is how you see. Remember the experiment that we did a few weeks ago with your finger? Okay, same thing here. You saw that it's how natural it is to see this way. This is how we see. We focus, but that focus comes at the expense of blur on the parts that we are not focusing on. So that is something that is desirable in your photography and in your cinematography. It's considered natural, elegant. It's something that is expected most of the time. All right. So bokeh is a function of depth of field, like Ms. Lebron mentioned. What's depth of field? Well, you know that a while ago, we were talking about several elements that you can use to improve your photography. And among those elements, we mentioned lights, we mentioned things like patterns, symmetry, and others. One of the elements that we mentioned was depth of field. And I told you in that moment that we will be coming back to this. So let's talk about depth of field, which is another concept that you need to understand. So I've been giving you a few concepts today to munch on and to digest. We already mentioned the f-stop. We just mentioned bokeh, and we're going to explain now depth of field. And depth of field is the distance between the nearest and farther objects in a scene that appear sharp or focus in an image. In that previous lesson, I showed you a photo where we had several cans of, I think it was Diet Coke, and some of them were blurry and some of them were in focus. This picture, as you can see, is very similar. When you look at this picture, when you look at an image and you're dealing with depth of field, you have to think in terms of foreground, midground, and background. Foreground is what is in front of you, what is closest to you. Background is what is farthest from you. Midground is that space between the foreground and the background. In this image, what is in focus? The foreground, the midground, or the background? The midground. The rest of you agree with him or no? Okay. And it's pretty obvious because the foreground, which I told you is the closest thing to it, you can see that the closest cadets are blurred. The foreground, which is the farthest part away from you, we can see, look at the picture, and we can see that they're also blurred. But those that are like in between, like in the middle, appear pretty much in focus. And here we're dealing with something that is called the focal plane. Whenever you want to achieve bokeh, you have to work with something that is called focal length or focal distance. And that has a lot to do with the size of the aperture when you're taking a photograph. Let me explain focal distance and also the field plane. Look at this image here. Let's say that this is you, the photographer. That's you, that great person there. And you're going to take a picture of your favorite mechanic leaning on your car. He did a great job. He fixed your car, and you want to take a picture of him because you're happy with his performance. The focal length is the distance from the sensor of your camera to your object that appears in focus. That distance is the focal length. But remember, there are other things that you can see but not in focus. So that's the focal length. Now, there's something that we call the depth of field plane. And the depth of field plane is an area. Remember that you have to think in terms of foreground, midground, and background. You always must think that way when you're taking a picture. Think in 3 dimensions. Uh, in this case, the depth of field plane is the area between that blue barrier that you see there and this green barrier. That area between the blue and the green are the depth of field plane. And things will be more or less in focus, but where they will be most in focus is where you see the red barrier. If I'm looking at an object that is between the camera and the blue area, how is it going to appear? In focus or blurred? Exactly. And everything that is behind the green, will it be focused or blurred? I'm sorry? It will also be blurred. Thank you, sir. So everything that is between the blue and the green will be more or less in focus. There are degrees of focus, but where the focus will be sharpest will be in the red area, which is where the guy is, and that's where he should be because the subject of this photograph is him. Okay, so will this part of the car be as focused as this part of the car? Yes or no? Oh, you guys understood this then. I'm happy. You got it. If there's someone that did not understand it, I know that this is a bit technical and all that, but you guys seem to have a good grasp on this, and I'm super happy. If there's someone that requires additional explanation, you didn't understand something. No? Okay, then let's move on. Okay, you guys are doing great. So these things are things that you must consider when you are trying to get that beautiful blur in some part of your photo. Remember that you're going to have a project, and I expect you to show me bokeh in your photo. I expect to see that and other things too. And the old guys, this is like, the only way you can make this happen is by messing around with a camera. How many of you have access to a camera? Anybody else has access to a camera? I'm talking about a camera that is not necessarily your cell phone camera, just a camera, a DSLR, a mirrorless, I don't know. And again, if all you have is a cell phone camera, you're gonna have to use that. But using a camera that has like lenses and all that will give you the opportunity to experiment with the concept that we're explaining here. And guys, I can be here like 100 years explaining this, but until you actually start messing around with it, it's not going to register the way it should. So I am inviting you to today, ask dad or mom or grandpa or uncle or whoever it is for that camera and start messing around with it. Okay? Uh, Cameras are not meant to be thrown in a corner. They're meant to be used, right? So ask for that camera and start using it and messing around with it. Because, guys, the only way that you can learn swimming is by getting wet, right? Not sitting down, hearing someone talking. It's getting wet. So getting in the water. And the way you're going to learn photography is by, start taking pictures. You have to start. So I would like for you to start taking pictures today. You have many subjects you can shoot in your house. If you can get out of your house and you want to go to a beach and shoot a sunset, or go to a park and shoot something nice, by all means do that. Of course, observing safety rules. But if you can't leave your house, there are plenty of things you can shoot around your house. Maybe you have an action figure. Maybe you have a pet, a dog or a cat that you can photograph. You can photograph a rusty nail if you want to. You can take a picture of a rock if you want to. You can take a picture of anything. It's probably in your porch. It's probably in your living room. It's probably in your bedroom. But we need to get our feet wet, guys. We need to start taking pictures. So please today start taking pictures and experimenting with this because the project will be coming very soon. Okay? Any questions so far, guys? I'm sorry? Oh, a million if you want to. It's up to you. What I'm asking you is to experiment. So if you want to take 20 pictures or 40 pictures, it's really up to you, whatever satisfies you. But I just want you to get your feet wet. You know, that question is like, how long should I be in the swimming pool? As long as you want to. You're practicing, right? But that's what we want you to do, to practice. Okay, let's talk about something else. I said that you needed, in order to master exposure, you need to deal with three elements. We spoke about exposure, but that's not the only thing. There's something called shutter speed. And shutter speed refers to the length of time that a camera shutter is open when recording an image. Um, in addition to a camera lens, there is another mechanism inside your camera that is called the shutter. And the shutter is like it's like a piece of plastic that is closed. It's like a gate. It's closed. What does it do? It opens, allows light to go into the camera sensor, and closes. It opens and closes. When you take your camera and you go click, the shutter goes like whoop, boom. That's what it does. It opens and closes. That's what happens. When you click, remember, when you click your camera, basically what you're doing is operating the shutter. It's always closed. When you're clicking it, what is happening is it's opening and it's closing. But it's doing it at super speed, at fractions of a second. It's invisible to the human eye. You cannot see it. It's as flash. There are different shutter speeds, but all shutter speeds are faster than your eye can see. Unfortunately, what we have here is the PDF. We don't have a PowerPoint, and you cannot see how the images change. If you've watched the PowerPoint like I told you to in my website, you can see how this animated GIF shows you how the water looks at different shutter speeds. Think of the shutter speed in terms of your eyelid. I already spoke about the iris in your eye. Now I want you to think in your eyelids. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take, in 3 seconds, close and open your eyelids as fast as you can. Are you doing it? Start now. Okay. Now, I want you to do it slowly for the next 2 seconds. You're going to go like this. Okay? I'm giving you 2 seconds to do it. Do it now. Did you do it? What was the difference? Other than the speed, because I told you to do it faster and slow. Well, we know that the speed is different. But as far as the image that you're seeing, remember, we're talking about light because we see light. What happened? I'm not talking about motion. I'm talking about the image, not motion, the image. The way that what you were supposed to have learned is this. If you're doing it slower, your eye is opening slower. You can see more because you're giving more time for light to go in. If you do it too fast, less light is going in because it's too fast. You're doing it too fast. So, what the impact that that has on an image? We can see it here in this image. In this one, here's slower and here's faster. When it's faster, the image is going to look darker. When it's slower, the image is going to look brighter because more light is going in. You see the difference? Here, this is 1/10 of a second. Let's say you take a second and cut it into 10 slices. That's how fast it was. This one is 1/500th of a second. This is super fast. It's like 500 times in 1 second. So the picture is darker. So when you're taking pictures, shutter speed is important because that's how long you're allowing light to go into the sensor. What impact does this have? If you're shooting a movie and something is moving, if the shutter speed is less than it should be, you're gonna get blur. Let me give you an example. See if okay, sports photography. Let's talk about sports photography. In sports photography, how many of you have seen the poster of Michael Jordan up in the air making that slam dunk? That's a classic poster that I think everybody has seen. You've seen that poster? You know what I'm talking about? It looked like he's standing on the air, but he's not. Let me ask you a question about that picture. Do you think that the photographer told Michael Jordan, "Hey, Michael, stay there for a while so I can take your picture"? No. He was actually running super fast and he was jumping up in the air to make that slam dunk. You look at that picture and you can see the amount of detail. It's very crisp, it's very focused, and it looked like he's just standing there without moving. That's because the shutter speed was very high. And it can look that way. If you were using a slower shutter speed, what you were going to get was a blurry mess. I remember a picture I have of my granddaughter when she was a baby in her crib. We have this picture. We can see her focused, but her arm but we see is a blur. What do you think was happening there? And the shutter speed was not adjusted to match the speed of her moving arm, even though the rest of her body was still, but her arm. And what we have is it looks like you see a blur here in this part of the picture. So shutter speed is very important, guys. And the last concept that I'm going to explain to you is ISO. And ISO refers to the level of sensitivity of the camera to the available light. ISO is something that you also have to control. A low ISO, ISO, you use low ISO when there's a lot of light, because if you're adjusting the sensitivity of light, you need the sensor to be less sensitive when you have a lot of light, because if not, what you're going to see is everything white. Everything's going to be washed out. And if you're in a dark place and you're shooting at night, you need more ISO. You need to make your camera more sensitive to light to capture the light that is in the environment. But sometimes there can be so much of a thing. Okay? Sometimes you have to be careful because too much of something is not good either. When I'm out there shooting at night, I increase the ISO of my camera. But sometimes, depending on the type of lens that you have, you can have something called noise. Look at this picture. They are both shot in the dark, and it's a picture of a doll. It looks like that creepy doll from the horror movie. What's it called? Annabelle. It looks like Annabelle, but that's not Annabelle. Um, what's the difference between these two pictures? Okay, the one that had more ISO, we need more ISO, but the problem here is that it has too much ISO. And what ISO going to do is going to make the picture look blotchy, and it's going to make it look grainy. That grain that you see there, those little spots that look horrible, are called noise. And that is something we have to avoid in our photography. So guys, the bottom line is that when we are controlling light, we have to work with three elements. They are ISO, where we control the sensitivity of the sensor. They are aperture, where we control the area over the light that enters the camera, how much light is going in. And shutter speed, controlling the duration in which that light is going in. When you control those three things, you can control the exposure of your camera and have nicely exposed images. Okay, so I am going to stop here today. I gave you a lot of food to thought, a lot to digest. It's important that you work with this, okay, that you try to internalize it and understand it. And the only way you can do that is by working with a camera. So even if it's a camera from your cell phone, please start working with your camera today. Start taking pictures. Don't be afraid. Get your feet wet. So guys, I'll see you in our next lesson on Wednesday. And we will continue in this lesson because we have more things to discuss regarding photographic exposure. You'll have a great afternoon. I'll be seeing you next Wednesday. God bless you.